creative team. It's so good to see you tonight. Gosh, I've missed looking at your faces. That's a joke. I can't see your faces. Anyway, from wherever you are, New York City, Connecticut, Boston, New Jersey, or your parents' backyard like me, I'm so stoked you've chosen to join us. You've picked a great night because tonight we have a session called Black Art Matters. Tonight, Kalia Rouse is going to lead us through a conversation with a few panelists about how to heal and process through trauma through art. And as a creative team, this is going to be an incredibly poignant conversation for us tonight. So I'm not going to hold us up for much longer. Grab a pen, grab a notebook, lean in, jump in the chat, say hi to your friends, and I will see you on the other side.
Hey everybody, we are going to dive into this conversation called Black Art Matters, and it's a conversation around race and trauma as we commemorate this Juneteenth, a day where all Black people were freed from the oppression of slavery as signed by the Emancipation Proclamation by Abraham Lincoln. When that was signed and when that became effective, for 2.5 years after that date, Black people were still held as slaves. And so we celebrate June 19th as a day where all Black people were actually freed. And it's a day that's celebrated through different celebrations, through barbecues, through block parties, and just a discussion on the history of Black people in our American society. And we thought it would be very poignant to talk about the impact of art and trauma and resilience. And I think one of the cool things about art is that regardless of any history that has been rearranged or even whitewashed, art has been a way that Black people have been able to actually reflect our trauma and be a part of our healing, as well as reflect an accurate narrative of what actually was taking place. And so as many people consume art, and consume Black art, they're being told a story that cannot be erased from history books or can't be erased from our education. So I thought it would be appropriate to just share some really powerful examples of how art and trauma have been so connected within the Black community. And I just want to start off reading the lyrics to a song that most Black people have sang through the years called the Black National Anthem, and it's Lift Every Voice and Sing. And it was a song written by James Weldon Johnson in 1901 and adopted by the NAACP as a Black National Anthem in 1919. And the lyrics go, lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise, high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory has won. And that's just the first stanza. And in that song, I think it really illuminates this story of pain and trauma, but also resilience and joy and hope. And a little bit about James Weldon Johnson. When he wrote the song, he was a writer and also an activist. And most of his work had to do with bringing advocacy and attention to lynchings that were happening in this country. And so he had given firsthand detailed accounts of lynching parties and just the true atrocity of lynching in our country. And out of that knowledge, out of that experience, birthed this song. And he's not the only one in history who has been someone who's been able to express the pain and the trauma, but also the joy and resilience through his art. And I just wanted to give a few examples of that many of us are probably familiar with. The song Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday that was released in 1937 is a song that is actually protesting lynchings in our country. And it likens the atrocity of lynching to fruit on trees. Then we have Alvin Ailey's Revelation. It is a 3-part dance spectacular that starts off in the first part talking about the suffering of slavery through the pilgrimage of sorrow. Then the baptismal of joy called Take Me to the Water. And then the choral church celebration, which is called Move Members Move. And in fine art, we have the sculpture Tar Baby versus Saint Sebastian, which was done by artist Michael Richards. And it's a depiction of himself as a Tuskegee Airman with actual planes flying through his body as daggers in his heart. And it's basically a piece of art that signifies the hard work of the Tuskegee Airmen, but how when they return to this country, they experienced racism and oppression. And then we have some modern references like Childish Gambino's song, This Is America, Kanye West's song, New Slaves, and the movies like Fruitvale Station, Get Out, and The Wire. And so as we are having this conversation, you probably who are watching can think of some examples throughout history and throughout our story as Black people that have been indications of art as trauma, but also as a story that we're also telling about our experience and bringing true light to this narrative of our pain as well as our resilience and joy. And so I want to throw it to Rochelle just to talk a little bit more about collective racial trauma and what that does as it impacts an individual, and just briefly shed some light on what are some solutions and what are some things that we can do as we are processing this trauma.
Thanks, Kalia. Hi, everybody. So a little bit about trauma. This is going to be pretty brief, and we're happy to have any conversations that you'd like regarding trauma. And at the end, I'll share a little bit about some suggestions on ways to manage your body, look after yourself right now, because I know right now is challenging. So like Kalia mentioned, so what is trauma? What is racial trauma? So trauma is pretty common, and 1 out of 11 individuals will experience PTSD, which means that they've experienced enough trauma to where that trauma begins to have a debilitating impact on the person's lifestyle, their life choices, their relationships. And there is within the world of trauma, within the research and in the language of trauma, researchers and psychologists have coined the term historical trauma, which refers to the cumulative emotional harm of an individual or generation caused by a traumatic experience or event. They've also coined racial trauma. Another word for that is race-based traumatic stress. And this may result from racial harassment, witnessing racial violence, or experiencing institutional racism. This trauma may result in experiencing symptoms such as depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, feelings of humiliation, poor concentration, and irritability. And that is just a really small, snapshot of what the impact that racial trauma can have on the body. And if you think about it, when it comes to trauma, as a Black or brown individual in America, there's a very good chance that you will be experiencing multiple types of trauma at the same time. So for instance, you might be experiencing trauma based off of your past history. If you have if you grew up and had experiences of trauma in your childhood, and then now you're experiencing a natural disaster, which is a pandemic. And if you're having a traumatic response to that, which it can be traumatic. Things happen very quickly, and lives were lost, and there was definitely just loss of normalcy. There's a lot going on. So there's a grief with that. And then if you add on top of that trauma as it relates to race, and so collective trauma, this collective grieving, which can feel overwhelming. And in the beginning, to be honest, I had a hard time even connecting what I was feeling as a collective trauma. There's like a collective grief that's going on. So recognizing that, I think, is the very first step of finding healing, because research shows that the quicker you're able to seek help and get help and have conversations around the trauma that you're experiencing, the easier, I don't want to say the easier, but just the better overall health you will have as far as your mental health, your physical health, your relational health, connecting immediately and as quickly as you can to a support system is going to be tremendous as far as helping you grow and establish just a foundation for yourself so that you can continue to grow and flourish. Especially right now, because it's very challenging when you're hearing often about traumatic events that are going on outside of yourself. George Floyd's death, I honestly don't remember a lot of the 2 weeks that occurred after that period of time. And that's normal. That's a normal response to a traumatic event. Even though it didn't happen to me, right? There's a collective trauma that happens when an unarmed Black man or woman is killed, whether that's by law enforcement, whether that's by a citizen, right? And when we're waiting for justice, there's a collective grief with that. So I just want to acknowledge that first. I know it can feel heavy, but when we acknowledge it, we can actually move through it. Feelings of fear, anxiety, again, anger, depression, or guilt are common. So if you're feeling that, it's okay. The first thing, it's actually a common experience, and you're not experiencing it alone, which is actually brings hope to what you're feeling right now, because you're not going to live in it forever. Getting timely help and support is really important for managing your stress and making sure that your experiences of trauma don't develop into PTSD. But if it does develop into PTSD, there's help and support for you. So you're definitely not alone. And getting that help will help you develop healthy coping mechanisms as opposed to unhealthy coping mechanisms. So a few things to consider, just some suggestions on ways that you can potentially look after yourself and help yourself grow and nurture yourself and just be all God's called you to be in the midst of what is very, very, very challenging times right now, especially as a Black and brown individual in this country. So a few suggestions. Affirming and acknowledging an experience about race is actually really, it's helpful, because talking about your experience puts names to what you're experiencing, and instead of stuffing it down, it brings it forth. And when you bring it forth, there can be healing. Creating and seeking out safe environments. This is really important. So identifying who are those safe people who you can go to, who you can talk to help process the things that you're going through. Utilize storytelling. This is really powerful. Storytelling is a beautiful expression. It's a really powerful way of moving through whatever it is that you're experiencing, putting names and words and feelings to what you're experiencing. Actually, it helps individually, but it also helps collectively. So maybe storytelling will be through music or through art, and we're going to have a lovely individual talk more about that. But there's many ways that you can incorporate storytelling into your life. So I highly recommend that. And that can be personal. It can also be public if you'd like. Paying attention to your body is key. How are you feeling? How is your body feeling? Having a hard time sleeping or having a hard time finding an appetite is normal. So figuring out ways to be able to combat that is really helpful, just again, to make sure that you are as healthy as you possibly can be, because what we're in right now is not going to end tomorrow. By the name of Jesus, we're going to see change. We're going to see racism and racist institutions come down in this country, but that is not going to happen overnight. So being able to build resiliency, which I feel like have as a people, but just building that resiliency, making sure that you are healthy and prioritizing your health is really important. Try not to self-medicate. It's really easy to turn to a glass of wine, a substance, something to help with your emotions, but waking up the next day, the reality is those emotions are still there. So try your best. I know it can be really hard, but try your best not to turn to those unhealthy coping mechanisms, and instead try to develop healthy coping mechanisms. Again, storytelling, naming your experience, having conversations, creating safe spaces and seeking out safe spaces is a really great place to start. And if you'd like to have more conversations, we have a mental health referral team that is here to help. We have care teams at each of our campuses that are here to help. There's services in the community. There's therapy in the community. So the biggest thing I just want to share is, as difficult as this time is, as we all are experiencing what is arguably collective racial trauma, there is always hope. There's always an opportunity to be able to reground yourself and develop healthy coping mechanisms so that you can be all that God has called you to be during this time.
Wow. Thank you, Rochelle. That was so insightful. And, it just speaks to, I think, the heart of what we're looking to do with this conversation. How can we overcome and use art as a way of healing during this time? So to just share a little bit about his experience, I would love Pastor Darnell just to share from the perspective of how you've used your voice and you've used music to really process your own trauma and be a source of healing for you.
Yes, absolutely. I think, from my experience, so I walk out into the world as a Black man, and for a lot of times, I should say, I feel like I have to sort of dilute myself down to make myself digestible to society, generally speaking. But what singing for me, which is sort of what I do, and sometimes I write, what that does for me, it allows me to be my unpolished and honest self, while being fully accepted, because there's no way around. And so I think for me, along with this sort of catharsis that comes with comes with writing, comes with singing, I think that has been the sort of the major thing for me. I'll never forget 2015 when the shooting happened in Charleston, and I was set to lead worship that Sunday, and I was trying to get off for that Sunday. I didn't want to do it. I said to my team, like, I absolutely cannot go on, because I was just incredibly broken at what had happened, and I just couldn't see myself leading worship. But for whatever reason, we couldn't find anyone to lead worship, and that was all good. And I hopped on platform, and we started singing this song called "Oh Praise the Name," which I think will be what we'll be singing in heaven. And it's such an incredible song. And I could barely get through the song. I'm crying my eyes out, and I look out and I see Black, I see white, I see Asian, I see Nigerian, I see all these different people singing together. And for a moment, there was a fresh sort of wind of life blown into my hope and my faith. And I think that's just a look into what not just music, but what worship does, and what worship can do. And worship is obviously my lane, but I think when it comes to art and creativity, I think it has this way of just breathing hope into honestly, dejected and hurt souls. And I think that's been my experience when it comes to art, more specifically worship.
Amazing, Darnell. I can't imagine having to perform as you were processing such a really hard death. I know when that happened to me, I think I was in the room when you were singing that day. Yeah. What gives you the strength to actually process and move on? I mean, how are you not angry, or how did you find that?
Yeah, well, I think the Bible talks about they that worship God must worship him in spirit and in truth, right? And what truth looks like is being unapologetically yourself, and bringing everything with you, all the baggage with you into worship, and not putting on sort of this sort of farce. And so my approach to worship is to, I know that I have my doubts, I know I have my frustrations, but I'm going to lead angry gracefully. I'm going to lead frustrated gracefully. And then when you do that, there is this inherent sort of healing in worship that happens. When you worship, it tends to reframe the way that you see things, and it tends to reaffirm the truths that you already know. And so, it's kind of like, I don't want to I don't like needles, but sometimes I need to get the needle to get the healing. Sometimes I need to get through the pain to get the healing. And I think the same is true with worship. I got to get through the pain to get the healing that comes with being in the presence of God. And so I think for me, it's just I have no choice. Honestly, worship is the thing that shapes and molds and helps me to move forward. It gives me the strength to fight. Gives me the strength to fight for justice. Once I get off my knees in worship, it gives me all those things that I need to be what I need to be. So that's sort of how I approach it.
That's beautiful. And I was thinking about the song "Lift Every Voice and Sing" when you're telling us about your experience, and the writer actually wrote that song as a parallel to the story of Exodus, to God's people moving from oppression to freedom. And I could imagine every time I sing that song, like something wells up in me around the lyrics, around what's being said. and to know there's like a biblical foundation to this song that is so powerful. I agree that it feels very healing just singing the song, and I can't even sing good, so I can only imagine how it is for you.
No, it's an incredible song, and I remember vividly just growing up in school singing that song during Black History Month, and I didn't understand the gravity of it, but I did know that every time I sang the song, that I got these goosebumps, and I sort of welled up with pride, and uh, I was just, I don't know what came over me, and I think that speaks to the spirit in which it was birthed out of, and like I said, I think paint, like art frames and music frames pain in a way where it gives it a lasting an enduring relevance. And so like we sing that song now, and it's still as relevant as it was all those years ago. And same thing with Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday, which you alluded to, which was sort of a song of protest, right? So she sings these songs. Well, she's welcomed in these clubs to sing these songs, not Strange Fruit, but she gets there, she sings all the top 50 or whatever to appease whoever's there, but then she breaks out to this song, and she gets the ear of people who otherwise wouldn't sort of hear the plight of Black people, and I think it's just the shelf life of these things are just incredible to me. But anyway.
Wow, that's incredible. I want to just explain a little bit about why that happens. And we have the incredible Ashley Irving to just talk us through a little bit of the process that people experience when they use art as therapy, in particular, dance therapy, which is your lane of expertise.
So, hi, and thank you for having me. Yes, I'm a registered dance movement therapist. I'm en route to getting my license as a creative arts therapist, and I'm also a professional dancer. I will start with just talking about what is dance therapy. I think there's so many misconceptions. I often get, oh, so you're a physical therapist for dancers, or oh, no, I can't do dance therapy because I can't dance. But that's not true. Everyone can do dance therapy. And so really the codified definition is the use of the body and movement to promote the integration of the physical, the cognitive, the emotional, and social aspects of an individual. So physical meaning the body, cognitive meaning our thinking mind, emotional being our feeling states, and then social, how are we in relation to others? And so in sessions, I really utilize a lot of movement and dance, of course. So from improvisation to creating choreography with clients. And all of this is to really promote expressivity and then release of tension in the body and things like that. But the big key is the nonverbal communication. So it doesn't have to be dance. It doesn't have to be movement. I often use play and creative imagery, especially with children, because they embody so much of what they are experiencing, and then it is my job to assess and observe and take in to try to understand them better. I also utilize a lot of tactile stimulation, which is just touch, with people experiencing chronic pain, for pain management, and then also sensory processing issues. I also utilize mindfulness, so we think of like body scans, breath work, meditation, so allowing people to really go within themselves, and bringing awareness to what is happening internally for people to find self-regulation, to find restoration, relaxation. And then of course there is also verbal processing and narration that happens in sessions. And when someone comes to me, I curtail goals specific to their needs, but some of the, I guess, overarching goals that we address in dance therapy include like effective communication. Body language is so important. So what are we saying through our bodies? Coping mechanisms. So not only acknowledging and labeling our feeling states, but then what are we doing to deal with these feeling states? What are we doing day to day to address the presenting problems? And then I also help a lot with improving self-awareness and self-esteem. We're in a host of settings, hospitals, schools, everywhere, really. And so we're really able to meet the needs of a lot of different populations, from infants all the way to geriatrics, which is really, really very beautiful. To kind of touch upon trauma, I think it's amazing that neuroscience has really given us the knowledge about the brain. And so we know the left side of the brain is really responsible for speech and language, and that really deactivates when we are experiencing traumatic events or recalling traumatic events, whereas then the right brain, which is responsible for the emotional arousal, actually activates. And so neuroscience is really supporting and encouraging less language-oriented forms of therapy. So that's all of the creative arts therapies. That's dance, that's music, that's art, that's drama. So such beauty in uplifting how we can support people to healing without even talking. You know, there's so many qualities. I mean, I could name an infinite number of qualities that help us to heal through dance, but I'll just kind of name a few. They were touched upon a little bit earlier, but like creating a safe space. So as a therapist, having my clients come to an office, well, not right now, because now we're doing all of our sessions through Zoom, but typically having a person come to an office and feeling very secure and safe within the four walls of the office, the therapeutic confidentiality that's created then allows people to be able to be vulnerable and to express those maybe icky, uncomfortable things that are really very hard to share with friends and family. So I'm really grateful to be able to provide safe spaces. And then this also transcends beyond the therapy realm. Because as a professional dancer, I'm thinking about rehearsal studios and the stage. And Darnell just spoke about like getting up and performing and allowing all that we are feeling and embodying to come out and be expressed authentically is so very important. And then I also I'll give a shout out to my Connect group. And I really love my Connect group leads for creating a dance Connect group. And so I can show up and worship and pour my heart out and know that these women are going to be there to support me. They're providing a safe space so I can cry, I can rejoice. Anything is welcomed and I'm not going to be judged for it. So the beauty and safe spaces. I'd also say in dance therapy, the idea of feeling seen and heard and how that really promotes healing. We all have a story, we all have a journey, and so often we're not given a platform to share our stories. And if we are, sometimes it's devalued or misrepresented or just not represented at all. And so even when words are not accessible, it is so important to know that we're still deserving of being understood. And I really loved, I guess it was maybe 2 weeks ago now, Pastor Carl was speaking with Dr. Anita Phillips, and there was a moment when he said, yeah, I can't even articulate it. It just feels like this. And, you know, and he made a face and did this gesture. And as a dance therapist, I automatically tried on that gesture. And that's something I often do with clients. And by trying on and taking in their movement, I'm gaining a deeper connection and a deeper understanding to what it is that they're feeling. And so I just love that he did this. And I immediately started thinking of experiences and times in my life when I felt like that. You know, we can all just see that and know what that means. And so the beauty in movement and gesture, even when we don't have the words to articulate. And then the last thing I'd share is like a sense of community and connectivity. And so that can happen in dance therapy through groups. People sharing gestures, sharing movement, and then seeing its impact on others and knowing that, you know, I have an impact. I'm I can make a difference. And then also seeing like protests, people coming together, like physically moving, walking, marching, chanting, even dancing in the streets, and coming together to create change through action. So that sense of community, we talk about it a lot in church. Like we can't do life alone. Like we need to be in relation to others. And then I also think about more lighthearted, fun barbecues, family reunions, weddings, and we hear the electric slide come on, and everybody flocks to the dance floor, and we are all rejoicing and finding such happiness and joy in moving collectively, moving together with these choreographed dances that we all know. So there's so much healing that can come out of dance, and those are just like a few things that I wanted to mention, but there's so much more.
It's incredible, Ashley. I really resonated with everything you said, but in particular, once everything was coming out and we saw George Floyd's death and we were learning about Breonna Taylor and so many more, I had such a tightness in my body. I was experiencing anxiety myself, but then our church came together and we actually all protested together, and just the chanting and the yelling and the marching released something in me that I didn't even know till you said this. And I felt healed. I was like, oh, wow. Like it did something very deep inside of me. Just really quickly, do you have a story of maybe someone who you've seen come in with a lot of trauma, or that had to have so much, that needed so much therapy around pain that they were experiencing, and then they had a breakthrough through dance therapy with you?
Yeah. So I have a client who I've seen for a little while now, and she has experienced trauma through her history, but then also we are all experiencing this trauma today in the world that we're living in. And so she's pretty quiet and very tight and reserved within her body. And so a lot of the work has been like increment, like baby steps, and that's beautiful. So beautiful to see the baby steps and to know that they matter. Like you're not going to come in and then all of a sudden maybe be healed the next day. It's a process, and we have to trust the process. And so I'll share without revealing too much, but like I said, she's very reserved, very quiet, and very inward. And very recently, she decided to share with me poetry that she's been writing to help her to release some of the anxiety, to release some of that tension. And while she's not in a place yet to really do that, like physical release, she was taking the medium of art, poetry, writing, and then sharing that with me in session, all that she's been writing. And then she allowed me to move through my body to represent then what she had written. And it was such a powerful breakthrough, such a powerful moment, because this is the most expressive I've seen her in so many sessions, over the course of all of our treatment together so far. So that's just a little bit, but just the point of like baby steps and the process and trusting the process.
Wow, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that, Ashley. I did have one question for Rochelle, and I was thinking about everything that is coming up, at least within me, but within our church. And so many people are feeling angry, and they're feeling rage, or they're feeling guilt and lament. People who aren't of color, white people, are feeling guilt and lament. And there's just so many emotions that we are all collectively dealing with and that are coming up right now. So Rochelle, could you just give us possibly a couple tips for how we can immediately deal with some of that secondary emotion that's coming out as a result of the pain and trauma and the guilt that many of us are experiencing?
Thanks, Kalia. Yes, I thank you for asking that question. Yeah, the emotions are real, and I'm going to honor that moment right now, because instead of rushing through it, because what we are experiencing, what you may be experiencing as far as anger and rage and grief and lament can feel very overwhelming at times. And it's actually worth sitting with for a bit, because I think when we try to move through it too quickly, we're not naming and acknowledging what that emotion, how that's feeling again in our body and our mind and our emotions. God doesn't want us to wallow in our emotions, but naming it, right? If we don't actually name our emotion and place value on that emotion, then that emotion attached to the trauma, like rage, ends up being overlooked or excused or invalidated or denied. And sometimes I feel like when I bring up my experience with racism and I feel that anger, if that's denied in any way, I tend to I kind of shove it down, I suppress it. But when I do that, I'm actually creating a barrier to being able to feel it fully, which can actually become generational trauma, because it's trauma that's unaddressed. So I think the best thing that we can do is to feel what we're feeling, allow it to move through you. It kind of, I don't know, to me, I like to describe it as like a wave. It's like a wave of emotion. I think Ashley gave some great examples of ways to move through your emotions, whether that's through dance or writing, poetry, journaling. But I think the biggest thing is just don't do nothing. Definitely, if you're feeling it, don't sit in that emotion or try to pretend that it's not real or it's not there, because that's useless, because you are feeling it and it is overwhelming and it is a lot. So in order for your emotions not to control you, in order for you to control your emotions, that actually requires you to feel them all. And I love what Darnell shared about how through his worship, he didn't put his anger aside. In order to worship, he allowed his anger to be a part of his worship. And I think that's what God asks us to do. He asks us to bring our full self to him, and he receives us as we are. And he promises healing, and he promises hope. He promises to replace the ashes that we're experiencing and turn them into beauty. So yeah, activism is great. I think channeling that into protesting is wonderful. I felt a weight off my shoulders when I was marching with our church, because again, it's movement, it's activation, it's allowing what I'm feeling and experiencing to move through me, which is really key. But again, I think just being sure to allow yourself to feel it all, put names and validate what you're feeling is a really helpful step to processing the rage and the anger and the grief that you may be feeling, because those emotions are real and again very, very valid, and you deserve to feel them all and to experience them all and allow them to move through you, because when you do that, you actually are lowering the chances of that trauma becoming debilitating, but also you're creating that connection and community and network that is so powerful and so beautiful about the Black experience.
Incredible. Well, thank you all for just sharing your knowledge and wisdom and experience. I think in light of Juneteenth and as we celebrate this really joyous occasion, it's important to understand how we can heal and how we can move forward ourselves. But it's also important, I think, as we engage in so much art that is coming out right now on Instagram, so much artwork and songs and music and movies and all of these things that we didn't even really consider before, we understand how we are actually participating in someone else's healing as we're consuming this content. So I think it's really powerful. And I'm just thankful we were able to do this. I hope this helps. God bless everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was incredible. Kalia, team, thank you so much for leading us through this conversation tonight. Know that this creative team is going to be praying for you, specifically as I'm sure you're talking about this across many areas of our church right now. And we love you. We're really grateful that you would have taken the time, and we're really grateful to have you in our lives. Creative team, know that as we navigate this season, an unprecedented season as a church and as a nation, that we are not alone. You have a creative team and a church family to touch base with, to reach out to if you need help. If you're in this conversation tonight and you're thinking of someone else who needs to see this, this conversation, this panel, your creative oversight should be emailing you a link to be able to watch this later. So New York City, that's going to come to your inboxes on Monday. Also, tonight, some of our campuses are going to have after team night hangs. So check the chat for that information. If not, we will see you on Sunday. Remember, Creative occupies the 1 p.m. We love you, team.